Then there's this question of data transport, and we had lots and lots of discussions in various parts of this Smart Grid Interoperability Forum about various choices. I think that the IPv6 idea is helpful, if only because it's a well-known protocol and it has lots of address space. We may still need to have some support for IPv4 in order to cope with the fact that, like the situation I have at home, where I have a V6 6-low-pan network that's doing all the monitoring, but right now it's plugged into a system, a network service that only knows about IPv4. And so one of the controllers, the thing where all the data is being accumulated, knows how to talk V6 on the one side to all the sensors and V4 to the other side in order to reach the rest of the internet. At some point, I hope I can reconfigure that so that it's speaking V6 on both sides. The idea of having a common representation for the information that these devices are accumulating is important. One of the groups is working hard on something called SEP, next version of SEP 2.0. And here, I'm not trying to necessarily argue that that's the only one that we should be considering, but I do want to say that it's important we have a common way of representing the information. In a different context, to go back to the ARPANET world for just a moment, one of the problems we had was that we had all these different host computers whose resources we were supposed to be sharing. They came from different manufacturers, and they had different kinds of terminals. And we didn't want every host computer to have to know about every single kind of terminal on every computer in this ARPANET. So we agreed that we would invent a thing called a network virtual terminal. It didn't exist. It was a figment of our imagination. But the idea was that if an operating system was serving some particular kind of terminal, that it would translate whatever that terminal looked like into this common network virtual terminal expression. And so if you were a server on this network, the only thing you had to worry about was the terminals physically connected to you plus anything that showed up looking like a network virtual terminal. And that removed a lot of the n-squared translation problem that would have been common. So in a similar way, we may need to have ways of expressing a lot of the kinds of information that might be accumulated by these devices, whether it's about electrical power or about any of the other commodities, and express them in a way that everybody is willing to accept, and then, if necessary, translate into maybe some local proprietary representation for purposes of further interaction. With regard to monitoring and measurement, there have been debates about whether for example, the meter that might be installed by the power company should have in it also, combined together, an energy management system, or whether that should be a separable thing. I'd like to suggest to you that architecturally we'd like both of these things to work. We'd like it to be possible for someone, a third party, to offer the consumers an energy management system which might be independent of the meter. There's no reason why you shouldn't also have the possibility that the meter comes with a built-in energy management system. The implication of that architecturally is that there is an interface between the thing which is gathering data and the thing which is analyzing the data, and that interface be standardized so that multiple parties can offer these energy management systems and interact with the measurement part of the system in a uniform way. So a lot of these desiderata have implications for the nature of the architecture, the nature of the protocols, and the kinds of interfaces that need to be selected in order to give this kind of competitive flexibility. So there are a lot of ways in which we may interact with this Internet of Things, particularly many of the things that are part of our smart grid world. So I just want to step through and remind you of some of the perhaps unexpected things that might happen. Some devices may have tiny web servers built into them. In fact, I would, having gone through this slide set with someone earlier today, every single one of the examples I've given are not just may. Every one of these actually already exists. So there are devices like printers that are configurable, and you plug them in and they have a little web server on them. The same is true for the sensor network that I have. If you go and connect to its web server on the local internet interface, it pops up a configuration web page for you. So your browser becomes the tool for configuring this thing. Some of the management systems, like the SensorNet I'm using, already have a web-based tool kit for managing. Some of them may actually send email. Certainly, the system that sends me the alerts about the wine warming up is doing exactly that, or the moral equivalent of that with SMS. Chat, you may actually have devices that will chat with you. It feels a little odd, but in fact, having a chat with your refrigerator might someday make sense, especially if the things inside the refrigerator have RFID chips on them, and you could legitimately ask the refrigerator, do I have any milk in the refrigerator? Now, it might not be able to figure out how much is left. It might only be able to say that it's been in there for 3 weeks and it's going to crawl out on its own if you don't do something about it. So the idea of having an interaction, and by the way, it doesn't just have to be text interactions. There's always the possibility. I can imagine, various devices around the house tweeting at you. This is a weird world that we're in. Or some of them, especially that are mobile, may very well make use of the fact that they know where they are and want to report to you where they are now, or you want them to report to you where they are, or or maybe you want to be able to ask, where the hell are you? Like your luggage is something that you might want to know. You've heard the story about the guy that goes up to the ticket desk and he says, I'd like to buy a ticket to Paris and I'd like my luggage to go to Istanbul. And the clerk says, ticket agent says, I'm sorry, sir, I can't do that. And he says, well, I don't know why not. You did it last week. So anyway, geographically indexed information is turning out to be immensely powerful and useful. We see it at Google, of course, because of the use that people make of Google Earth and Google Maps. Google Earth being another example of a way of presenting geographically indexed information in various layers. Mobiles are really interesting because they are not cell phones anymore. They may be able to provide telephony, but they are clearly programmable devices. It's easy to imagine replacing all of the remotes that you have with all the various entertainment equipment at home with your mobile, especially if the entertainment equipment and the mobile are both part of the net in the house. Or in fact, if they're just part of the internet in some way, again, strong authentication being a big issue, you might be able to interact with and manage this entertainment system no matter where you are in the world. And that's a very interesting possibility, and it's already true. In my case, I have Verizon Fios. They have services that allow me to work with the DVR from anywhere on the internet. Of course, I'm relying on the authentication to keep the 15-year-old next door from reprogramming my DVR and having things on it that I wouldn't particularly want to have on the recorder. There are implications here about discovery of devices that are in the premises. A mobile has often a very limited display area. It's often been attractive to me to imagine walking into a room like this and having my mobile discover that there is a projection unit available, and then using it to present what was on the mobile in a large format. Or maybe act as a third party and say to the projector, please go to this website, pull up this presentation file, and present it. And then I'll control what's going on from my mobile rather than having to put my laptop here or use a remote clicker. So there are the possibility of having devices discover themselves or discover each other and then learn how to interconnect, even if it's an ephemeral thing like going into a hotel room, is a very attractive possibility from my point of view anyway. And that it doesn't stop there. I mean, mobiles, even today, at least some of our applications, allow you to speak to the mobile and have it interpret what you said. I was out at Patterson Air Force Base last week to meet with the Air Force Space Command, and we weren't exactly sure how to get there, but we had our trusty Nexus 1, so we said, right at Patterson Air Force Base to the MAPS program, and it popped up a path to get to the Air Force Base for us. So the idea that the mobile can take spoken commands and can generate spoken responses is actually quite interesting. And some of you, I'm sure, have already discovered the mobiles can be sensors all by themselves. They can sense where they are. They can sense what attitude they have. They have accelerometers in them. There are a variety of interesting applications that are starting to show up using mobiles as sensors, if only to tell you where you've been, and maybe later to tell you that wasn't a good place to be because there was hazardous material discovered there, and maybe you should go talk to your doctor. All kinds of possibilities arise when you have these devices that you carry around on your person. Some devices may produce video, webcams being the obvious case, and those might be part of a security system. They might be part of simply something keeping you in contact with friends. This is a translation program that Google makes use of. We translate about 50 different languages back and forth. We don't do uniformly well with every pairing. We're upfront about that. This was an article that was written in Spanish in El País, a popular publication in Spain, and I didn't quite know how to read it, so I gave the URL of that web page to our Google translation system, and it produced a web page that looked exactly like the other one did, except all the Spanish was replaced with English. So I left this in here because I wanted to suggest to you that the kinds of translations that we may need to do in our environment could be quite elaborate. And so this has made me think of C3PO, which you'll remember was quite good at translating a variety of different machine languages from one to another. So here we are. Some of us, I think many of us, see this very constructive potential that the interoperability program offers to us. But I think that we have to be cautious, and I have heard repeated calls for caution that we don't either deliberately or by accident produce a very fragile and brittle system. Because if we are in fact expecting our society and others to rely on these things, we need them to be very resilient and very robust. Security and privacy are major issues, and there's been a great deal of discussion about security. We have working groups and task forces and the like paying close attention to this. There's still a lot to be done, in my opinion, there. Privacy is equally important. Information about your use of resources, from that information, it's possible to infer a great deal. When you think about whether the lights are off or on, and when were the lights off and on, or does the temperature in the garage go up because there's a car that just got parked there, there are a variety of different things that one could infer from having access to simple sensor information, and I think our appreciation for that is important. I think that we also should be very concerned that we're playing around with power, and this is a lot of it, in fact, in the aggregate. And so no matter what we do, no matter how carefully we design our smart grid, it's also going to have to be paranoid. It's going to have to assume that our stuff doesn't always work. It's going to have to assume that there are bad guys out there deliberately trying to interfere with the stability of the system. And so we have to rely on the generation and distribution parts of the system to be conservative in any assumptions about how reliably we will be able to respond, for example, to an indication that we should reduce power consumption. Because if the system makes the assumption that we will do it, and for some reason the system doesn't do it, then we have a problem. Certainly, centralizing things historically has led to risks, because if that part that's centralized doesn't work, then a lot of things stop working. So decentralization and distribution are often very attractive. On the other hand, it makes for a more complex environment. And so we get into the problem of trying to analyze and understand nonlinear complex systems, and that's what this will be if it's implemented. We worry that somebody could somehow manage by tweeting or otherwise to get a lot of things to either turn on or turn off simultaneously, which would cause substantial changes in the demand for electricity and cause serious problems, or at least systems to protect the system to cut out and shut down various parts of the grid. So we do worry not so much about one small compromise in one house in one neighborhood, but a compromise that has a very broad impact on a large number of devices that are either consuming or potentially generating power. I have a long riff on security problems. I don't want to beat this into the ground. I just want to say that all the things that have happened to us in the public internet are happening partly because it didn't have a lot of the protections in it that we now see could be implemented, but also because it's in use by the general public. And once you move into that regime, the general public contains people in it who do not wish to cooperate, who don't want to be collaborative, who do want to cause trouble and cause harm. And we have to accept that and try to defend against it. It says I'm supposed to go to a hotel now. That's because it thinks that it's 3 time zones away. Okay, so why do we have all those security problems? Well, one answer for that is that we have operating systems that don't defend themselves very well. Or we have browsers that are naive. They run at too high a level of privilege, and you know how browsers work. They go to some website, they download a file, and they interpret it. And if you're naive about what you're interpreting, some of the thing you interpret may be a Trojan horse or a virus or a worm or something else. We don't do well with generating passwords. We're terrible at reusable passwords. We're particularly bad at. We use the same one for a whole bunch of different things because we can remember it. The problem is that once it's broken, everything is compromised. And when we use really strong passwords, we can't remember them, so we write them down and people find them. We mess up configurations. I mean, this is probably the most embarrassing and worst thing about these kinds of online systems, and that is that it's possible to misconfigure them by accident very easily. Some of the most embarrassing and widespread disasters in my recollection on the internet have not been a result of somebody compromising the system. It's because somebody just messed up a configuration and they couldn't tell. And so if you were looking for a really interesting dissertation topic, it would be to ask, how could I tell that a configuration is harmful? How could I? It's easy if the parameter is out of range. I mean, that's the trivial case. The harder case is that this particular constellation causes half of the network to disappear or causes this website to go away. We had an example of that in Pakistan where something on YouTube was unacceptable to the Pakistani administration and they wanted to shut off access to YouTube in Pakistan. No, they're a sovereign country. They're free to do that, except that the method they happened to use cut off YouTube's access to half of the internet. And they claim that wasn't on purpose. So the point here is it was a misconfiguration error. I don't know what to do about that, to be honest with you. It's just really, really hard. So one thing you'd like to do is to try to minimize the amount of configuration that's needed in order to get the system to work. The other thing which is disturbing evolution in the internet world, which will have a direct impact on the smart grid, is that it's not just hackers that will cause trouble. Originally, that's all it was hackers trying to show that they could do something that because you had failed to prevent them from doing it. But now we have organized crime and we have the potential for state-sponsored cyber warfare, which could be targeted at the systems that make the smart grid work. So we have really serious work to do. In some ways, it's outside the purview of most of our working groups. It's certainly outside the purview of the governing board, except for one thing. We are responsible for at least recognizing that this is an issue and a problem. We are responsible for trying to make sure that these problems get attention, even if it's not by each one of us, but by others who have the skill and the expertise to do it. But as part of the governing board, it's my view that we have to be attentive to some of these issues and at least feel responsible to make sure that somehow these issues are addressed, even if it's not within the ambit of our action parties. Privacy, I've already sort of mentioned. There are lots of things that privacy is very hard to come by these days. In fact, I'm reminded of a famous quote from Marshall McLuhan. He referred to the global village. Now, he was referring to connectivity among people. But I don't know about you, but I lived in a little village of 3,300 people in Germany for 6 months. And there was no privacy in this little village, particularly the post office operator knew who was sending mail back and forth to everybody. He also knew who was making phone calls, because in those days, this is like 1960, people didn't have phones at home. They had to go to the post office to make a phone call, and it was set up by the postmaster. So this guy knew everything. There was no privacy. So here we are. I'm sure that Marshall didn't really mean it this way, but now that we have the internet and we have this global system of connectivity, we have a global village in which there isn't very much privacy, and so I guess we shouldn't be surprised. And yet we should care a great deal about trying to protect that. Anyone with a mobile now can take a video or a sound recording or take a picture, put it up on the internet. Somebody else can go and tag it. And before you know, somebody says, oh, you were over there. Why were you there? You said you were over here, and you don't seem to have been over there. So yeah, now we have a problem. There are lots of things like that which should give us pause. So let me just finish up by saying that I've often said that the good thing about the internet is everything is connected, and the bad thing about the internet is everything is connected. So as you go about your work, trying to make the smart grid work properly, may all of your packets land in the right bit bucket.